This is By Your Side, the podcast that cuts through the noise of new parenthood. No cliches, no guilt trips, just the real story. Practical tools and insights that actually help. I'm Katie, and I'm here to make sure you don't do this alone. Today, we are joined by Lauren Seager-Smith from For Baby's Sake, and this is a tough conversation I think we're going to delve in today, but one that's incredibly necessary. So, Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today. And I wondered if you could start us off by, how would you describe yourself to start with?
Well, it's funny, we were talking about this in the office the other day, and I said, I did one of those, I don't know if anyone's done the 16 personalities test or whatever it's called. Anyway,
Okay.
Well, I came out as the Queen, as being most like the Queen, and my colleagues were asking if I was a crisp, what would I be? And I said, probably a kettle chip, and if I was a dog, I'd be a golden retriever. So I think
Love it.
it's sort of, I try and be quite grounded. I'm quite into sort of fairness and justice and that
But
in
you
that
can
kind
still
of
roll.
place. Yeah, but but I've also got a very soft kind of doggy side. So a bit of all of that, I think. Yeah.
I love it. And actually, I can see how that works incredibly well for what you do. So I think, can we jump into For Baby's Sake and what it is set up to do, why it exists?
Yeah, so For Baby's Sake was set up because our founder, Stelio Stefano, was really moved and really troubled by the baby Peter Connolly story that some people may or may not remember. Baby Peter lost his life, was murdered by his parents, and he just felt, why do we keep seeing the deaths of these very young children over and over again? What more can we do as a society, to protect our babies and our children? And that led to the development of For Baby's Sake. And right in the early days, it was about understanding what was happening in the lives of these families. And what was coming up time and time again was the impact of intergenerational domestic abuse and the risk that posed to babies and children. And so that's how For Baby's Sake was born, to give parents the support they need to protect babies.
I love that because it is focused on the parents and what they need. Before we kind of delve into that a bit more, what do you mean by domestic abuse? What can that? I think I know, and somebody listening might think they know, but it would be really good to understand, what is it? How does it show up? What would you mean as domestic abuse?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because I think whenever we hear any phrase like that, we have a picture in our mind, don't we? And sometimes that's influenced by the media, it's influenced by film and TV, and sort of the traditional understanding of domestic abuse is kind of, a big burly man who beats up his wife. Whereas our understanding now is much broader than that. So the Domestic Abuse Act 21 describes domestic abuse as a whole spectrum of behaviours, from physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, but understanding more and more about coercive control, which is where somebody tries to do everything to control all aspects of your life, leaving you feeling really unsafe and really isolated. And that tends to be the most pervasive form of domestic abuse. So any situation where someone is making you feel unsafe and making you feel like you're isolated from others and really need support and to seek help.
Oh, so that's really, it's that coercive control. So can that come across as being almost positive? Now, I'm using the term, and it's a new term I've learned last week from having teenage children, of love bombing, of like being very, there's only you in my life, you don't need anybody else but me. Those could that be, given the context, coercive control? I'm just thinking, do all of these things at the time feel negative?
No, I think, we've worked with hundreds of families over the last 10 years through For Baby's Sake. And what we would say is that domestic abuse is very complicated, and people are very complicated. Relationships are really complicated. So when people say to somebody, oh, why didn't you just leave? Or why didn't that person just leave the relationship? It's not as simple as that, because people can be manipulative. They can also be all shades in one day. So you talked about love bombing. Quite often with coercive control, it starts with, huge amounts of affection, love, with gifts, with you're the most beautiful person in the world, I want to give you everything. And we don't always see what that can then go on in some relationships to lead to, with power and control, and then controlling all aspects of somebody's life and causing that harm to someone. So relationships are complicated, and I think many of us, hearing this will understand that and will have experienced that, whether in our own relationships or the relationships that we grew up with. We're difficult as human beings, and so it's really supporting people to understand, if you don't feel safe, then that's something that needs to be looked at.
So that's, and as you say about relationships, so the stats I think at the moment are 1 in 5 people have experienced domestic abuse in their lifetime. And one of the things, I was watching the video that's on your website, which I'll drop as a link to this because I think it's so powerful, and it's about two parents, and it starts with them talking about their childhoods. So it's not that it jumps straight into there is abuse there and that's wrong. It's about actually both of them have experienced something that hasn't necessarily supported them in their early childhood. And that might play into then their relationship, either in maybe being the powerful or the powerless one. I just wondered, what do you see when you work with parents? Because it's very easy, I think, to put blame. And sometimes that can be from, I'm trying to steer away from certain terminology, but somebody who has experienced rather than giving abuse, put the blame almost on themselves of, well, it's my fault, or equally it's their fault. So
I
I
think
suppose the question is, what have you seen in working with parents about their own experience and how that plays into maybe the relationship they're in at that time?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I would say, that for our parents, many of our parents have multiple, what are often called adverse childhood experiences. So a lot of our parents grew up with domestic abuse in their own homes, but also other forms of child abuse. They grew up with parent mental health. They grew up with high levels of poverty within the home. All these different factors that can impact on relationships, and impact on family life, and impact on how we feel about ourselves. And so for many of our parents, they didn't grow up knowing what a healthy relationship looks like. No concept of that. Many of our parents are very young. Many of our parents also care experienced. And quite often, if you've had those experiences, you're naturally drawn to other people that have those shared life experiences with you. And the challenge is, if we haven't had support to be able to process some of those things and what's gone on for us, it can make those relationships in our own adulthood really quite challenging and quite difficult. Now, it's important to say that not everybody that goes through those things hurts other people. It's really important to say that. But we do know from research that sometimes when we've been through those things, we might be more likely to use those behaviours towards others, and we might be more likely to experience those things within our own relationships. And again, some of that's around not knowing what healthy is. And some of that is around, really needing support to be able to get out of difficult situations when we're being manipulated and used by people. And I tell you something that really struck me. The occupation that are most likely to experience domestic abuse are nurses. And that's so
Oh,
heartbreaking,
that's
isn't it?
so interesting.
Yeah, it's so
Wow.
heartbreaking. And I think sometimes it's those of us who are feel the need to please people pleasers, the carers, the givers, the helpers. Sometimes we think we can save somebody, we can help somebody.
Yeah,
We want to save somebody from something we might have gone through in our own childhood. We want to rescue somebody. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people in health professions and in caring professions.
absolutely.
And that can sometimes mean that we're not always in the best space to care for ourselves and to really believe what we deserve in order to feel safe.
Yeah, that's so, so powerful, isn't it? So the kind of almost, I love the term emotional backpack. So what you've experienced in your childhood and what you've seen in those relationships play into how you have a relationship with someone else. And I suppose becoming a parent is one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing that anybody will ever have to do. And that will naturally put strain on a relationship. And that's or even a relationship that felt good or was seemingly working beforehand. And again, I think, was it 30% of domestic abuse cases start during pregnancy because of that added
Mm.
pressure. So I'm wondering, why in everything that you're saying, why does that become almost like a tipping point, or does that escalate things?
Yeah, and we did a piece of research which we can share in the notes around mental health during that perinatal period. So during pregnancy and those early days with baby, and what came out for both mum and dad was high levels of impact on emotional and mental health during that period of time. 1 in 10 dads said they turned to substance and alcohol use during that time, and we know that there are a whole kaleidoscope of things that can put on pressure during pregnancy, just what it's like to have a baby. Mine are 12 and 14 now, but I can remember back to that. So as mum, it can mean that you're very dependent on the other person. It can mean that you can become more isolated from others as time goes on. You're probably, if you're still in a relationship with someone, both struggling with sleep deprivation. It can increase anxieties over money. And if you have to go down to one salary, how are you going to cope? How are you going to manage? We know that maternity, paternity pay is not great. All of those things can put a lot of pressures and strains on. I think what can also happen is it can exacerbate that opportunity to control somebody else. And I think it also brings up some sometimes gendered expectations, gendered pressures around how men are expected to behave, how women are expected to behave, and that can exacerbate abusive behaviours. And so I think there are lots of reasons why we see that uplift within pregnancy in those early days. And it's really hard for parents because you want to present a picture that everything's perfect. This is meant to be the happiest time of your life.
Yeah.
But for many parents, it's a really, really challenging time. And I heard a statistic recently that 1 in 5 couples separate before the baby turns 12 months old. And so, this impacts a lot of families. Even if it's not domestic abuse, the levels of conflict can definitely rise during that period of time.
So that in itself is really stark, isn't it? It shows you that it is an incredibly difficult process to go through. And I think the more we can call out, it's if it doesn't feel great at the moment, it's please don't play into that feeling of it's meant to be the best time of my life and it's meant to be perfect and I'm supposed to be a perfect person, perfect parent even. But what might be past all the stresses and the strains of tiredness, maybe financial reduction, and all the other pressures that come with being a parent, what might be some of the telltale factors, or what might be those some of the signs maybe that you're experiencing elements of that power imbalance, so the coercive control potentially?
Yeah, I think what's important as a charity, we take a trauma informed approach to domestic abuse. And so, even if you're thinking about yourself or you're thinking about someone in your life that you care about, a friend or a family member, it can be quite difficult if someone comes straight in with the, "Are you experiencing domestic abuse?"
Yeah.
And I think what's helpful is to kind of explore, even in your own thinking or about others, kind of how safe does home feel? How safe are you feeling at the moment? What's bringing you joy in your life at the moment? What's bringing you happiness at the moment? Is there anything that feels difficult or areas where you're struggling to cope? And how is it for you as a family at the moment? How is it for you as a couple at the moment? Is there anything more I can do to support? Is there anything that could help you? Is there anything that's worrying you or doesn't feel quite right that you want to explore? I think it's about asking yourself those questions and asking those questions of others and just opening up that space, because what we do know is that people are really scared to share what's going on for them in pregnancy because there's a lot of fears around what will happen to the baby, what might happen to other children. And what I would say is we work with social care teams all the time. They're not in the business of taking babies away. They're in the business of keeping families safe. And it's so important that you talk to your midwife, you talk to your health visitor, you talk to your GP, because they are used to having those conversations. And you say what's concerning you and what's on your mind, and it will be okay. And that's so important to get that message across, because it can be a real barrier, just not knowing what will happen if you say something, that people really want to help you and they want to help your whole family give your baby what your baby needs.
That's so well put. And I don't think it's not always posed in that way. And there probably has been quite a big movement towards that by certain professionals. But I know for some, the experience is still being asked outright of, are you experiencing domestic abuse?
Mm.
So I think if you're in a position if you're in a position then where you aren't quite feeling quite safe, it's important from what you're saying to actually speak to a professional, maybe in those terms of not feeling quite right, or the relationship doesn't feel quite right
Mm.
at the moment. And knowing that that's hopefully going to be taken in that gentle and supportive way. But it's just really important to reach out to somebody, whoever that is, just to start to talk about those feelings. I mean, I guess, with the work that you do and the work that you do with parents, how vital is that starting to talk and open up and look at what's going on for them? How important is that?
Yeah, it's really important. And it's that first step to positive change, isn't it? And on our website for Baby State Trust, we've got some different things that can support around this. We've got parental relationship spectrum, which helps you think about whether what you're experiencing is kind of, what a lot of people go through in terms of conflict, or whether it's moving into domestic abuse and abusive behaviors, can help you think about that. But it's so important just to say, that this has been happening and I'm not quite sure, and not to be afraid to do that, and to think about what impact is it having on you, because I think that's so important. That sometimes we think, oh, it's not important, or, oh, I don't think it was abuse, I think it was just this. But if it's making you feel sad, scared, anxious, that's having an impact. And so it's being able to explain to a friend or to a professional that this is happening and this is how it's making me feel. Because what we look at a lot within our work is what you're going through as mum, if you're pregnant, is having an impact on your baby. And so we know so much about baby development now that even mum's stress levels have a direct impact on baby. And so it's being able to think about, what do I need and what does my baby need to have, a really safe and healthy pregnancy and entry into the world. And so it's about really sort of being able to share, in a safe space, this just doesn't feel quite right, and I think we need some more help. I think the other thing I would say as well is around sort of mental health over the perinatal period, and during that period of time, for lots of people it can be a real struggle, and it can be a struggle for dads too.
Yeah.
And so if you're worried about the mental health of your partner during this period of time, if they're, becoming increasingly anxious and depressed, turning to substance abuse, again, it's really important to let people in and say things just don't feel right. And again, that's not saying that everyone that experiences mental ill health goes on to be abusive. Absolutely not. But it's about thinking about that context that puts stresses and strains on families and can make those things more likely to happen.
Absolutely. And I love there that you've brought in the male partner too, because it's about validating how we feel. So if you are feeling in a certain way, the more that you can express that with your partner, or if you really don't feel safe, with somebody that you have a good relationship with, or a health professional, is really important. But as you were saying, in a partnership, and that could be same sex partnership, for
Yeah,
example, as
absolutely.
parents, that it's to say how you're feeling sometimes then opens the door, or gives the floor to the other person to say how they're feeling too. And that's what you're saying, is that emotional ability to talk about that is really vital.
Yeah, and also, some parents, really good that you brought up same sex relationships as well. It's really important that they're seen and that they're heard. And also, some families are living with are living with grandparents as well, and are experiencing that wider family dynamic and the pressure
Yeah.
that can put on. And you might feel like you're going to let everybody down if you share what you're experiencing and how it's making you feel. But just keep coming back to the fact that you matter and your baby matters. It's not about the rest of the wider family. It's about you and your baby. And that's where it's so important, whatever your family dynamic is, that you ask for that help and you share what you're experiencing.
Yeah, I love that. And I've had a number of podcast guests and it's very much about the focus on the child. What can we do for the baby? And when you put it in that context, you're able to get over your own anxiety of, it's just me. I'm making this more than it needs to be, or I'm making this up, or it's not as bad as, or I don't, it's just, I don't it's my fault that I'm feeling this way. Because when you put baby first, it allows you to start to articulate your emotions so you can support baby and doing the best for
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah, and I've just been really reflecting actually over the last kind of few weeks about how sometimes within services we separate, have services for women, and then you have services for men, and then you have services for babies and services for children. But in
Mhm.
pregnancy, you can't separate mum and baby. They come together as a team. And so what's good for mum is good for baby. And so, and also dad is within that somewhere, very
Absolutely.
often a
Yeah.
positive influence on that and a key positive
Yeah.
influence, but sometimes no, sometimes not. Or whether it's, a same-sex partnership, sometimes that other person is in your team and in your circle, and other times they might be making things really challenging for you. But it's really important that we see that and that we embrace that. Where dads want to be a really positive co-parent, they want to be there for their partner and the baby, they need help to do that too. Like, none of
Yeah.
us are born knowing what to do, right? We have no idea how to parent.
Ah, thank you. Can you just say that again? Because that's
We
helped
have
us.
no idea. And it doesn't get any easier as they get
I
older.
love it. I love it. No,
Yeah.
none of us, let's make that really, really clear. None of us have any idea what we're doing
No,
when we first become
no.
parents. And we all bring what we went through as children. And we all bring those models of relationships, good,
Yeah,
bad, indifferent, into a new relationship and into that relationship with your baby as well. And it's
yeah.
about understanding that of you don't have to have it all fixed or sorted, but putting baby first and making sure that baby's safe and that you're safe is really important.
It goes back to what you said about the emotional backpack, that I think that's such a good image, that both parents are carrying that backpack. And I've been feeling a bit frustrated recently as well around the emphasis within sort of family hubs and children's centres on parenting programs around, we're going to teach you how to parent, not seeing how many of us as parents need to be parented ourselves,
Yeah,
like
we need
need to be loved
parenting.
and cared for ourselves, just need someone
Yeah,
to mother us and say you're going
yeah,
to be okay, and or father us in a positive way and say, I'm going to support you and I'm going to help you and we can get through this together. We feel
yes.
like as soon as we become parents, we suddenly become the responsible adult. And a lot of
Mm.
us don't feel like that and don't know how to be that. And so it's having, real care for ourselves as well, and knowing this is how everybody feels. But for some of us, we need that extra support, and it's okay to ask for help.
I love that. And it really kind of gave me goosebumps of that point of actually, you may be a parent, but you still need parenting. So,
Yeah.
how important it is to say, I don't feel safe, or I
Yeah.
don't feel comfortable, or I don't feel happy. And what's that about? So, I suppose we'll kind of go one way to another. So, if someone isn't feeling safe, and I think it's a good enough kind of broad term to say, actually, this doesn't feel right and it doesn't
Mhm.
feel safe. We've said about talking to someone they trust, so and a health, a professional or a very close family member. What else can you do? I love the fact that you've got tools on your website, so we'll put links into that. But if it's that growing feeling of this doesn't feel right and this doesn't feel safe, what kind of steps would I take, or could
Yeah,
I
well,
take?
I would definitely recommend contacting the National Domestic Abuse Helpline. You can talk to them. If you're immediately concerned about your safety, you need to contact the police. That's really important. And again, we've seen lots in the news recently around how police forces are having a lots more training around domestic abuse, including coercive control now, to be able to respond to that. I would say that it's really important to think about safety planning. So on our website, we've got free tools around how to develop your own emotional safety plan, about the different things that you need to feel safe. But think about that safety more widely. So think about, who can you turn to? Who can you reach out to? If you're feeling tonight that you just need to get out of this situation, where can you go? Who can help you? It's really important to kind of have that safety planning in mind. But, again, there are lots of local domestic abuse charities as well in your local area. And again, your GP, your midwife can give you details of those different services. So you can reach out for help and assistance, and they can really help you think about what your next steps are. And they won't then, they're there to help you and support you and be alongside you and help you make those decisions and help you clear your head to really think about what you need to do next. And again, they've got lots of experience in doing that. You can also contact the NSPCC helpline as well, which is something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily realise. And they've got domestic abuse specialists that work on their helpline. So if you're going through this yourself or you're worried about somebody, again, they've got a team there that can help you and support you.
I love that. And I think one of the things that jumped to my mind, it was, what if I told somebody and they dismissed what I was saying? So, for example, if I say to my midwife, I'm not feeling very safe right now, or, I'm kind of getting the feeling that I'm not allowed out of the house unless my partner's with me, or they've stopped me getting in touch with friends. It doesn't feel very safe. And it's downgraded. So if that person says, oh, they're just looking after you, or they're just making sure you're protected, but it still doesn't feel, or it doesn't feel right, and they haven't validated that, what would be your advice to somebody going through that?
Yeah, and I think that can definitely happen. So particularly if we turn to family and friends, sometimes we hear what we think we want to hear. So sometimes we want someone to say, oh no, that's really normal, like don't worry about it, that everyone's like that, or my partner's the same, but deep down it's not the same, deep down it's not okay, but you almost want to hear that. And so it's so important if someone does sort of dismiss it or says, oh, I think that's normal, or someone might have reasons to say that. So for example, if you're in a particular faith community, within that community they might have an emphasis on staying within the relationship. Lots of cases they don't. There's lots of work being done within faith communities around understanding domestic abuse, but that might be the case. When you're talking to family, like we said, they might have those vested interests and want you to stay together as a family, and it's their grandchild and they don't want to think about anything other than the kind of perfect situation. So that can happen. I would say don't give up. Don't give up until you talk to someone that you feel really hears you and really seeks to understand. That's where things like the domestic abuse helpline, the NSPCC helpline, are really important, because they are trained professionals who work with this all of the time, and they'll really be able to help you work through whether this is okay or whether this doesn't seem safe and whether you need to get some help.
Yeah. And I think, just listening to everything you're saying, it's actually trust. And you say, even when somebody tells you what you think you want to hear, you still will know deep down that it still doesn't feel right. So it's about then, as you said, kind of reaching out to those trusted professionals that won't necessarily tell you. And I suppose that's part of it. Don't always just seek out somebody who will tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah, exactly that. And sometimes our friends can feel awkward, can't they? Or they might know your partner as well, and so they don't want to interfere or be the one that's blamed for anything that might happen. And that's where getting that independent advice and support is really important. And I'd also just say, look, for any dads that are listening as well, we do work with dads who are impacted by abuse, and this can happen to dads as well. And I just want you to know that those helplines are there for you too. And they do talk to other dads who are experiencing abuse. Again, it's really important to reach out. I think there's a lot of barriers to dads seeking help and support. It can feel like it's not the done thing for men to say that they're experiencing abuse, but really important to know that they're there for you too.
Absolutely. So we have covered quite a lot of ground in this, and really hopefully unearthed some of that. And I love the for me, one of the biggest things is, none of us know what we're doing, but also about putting baby right at the heart. Keeping baby safe is the paramount. And I suppose I'm going to round off, as I do with all of these podcasts, which is asking my guests, because for those of us that are kind of further along our parenting journey, it is easier, beauty of hindsight. But Lauren, if you were to give your younger Lauren advice before she became a mum, what advice would you give her?
Oh, I think I was so obsessed about getting married and having babies. I grew up in a very evangelical Christian home where it was kind of the done thing to get married as young as possible and have children as young as possible. So from my own perspective, I think looking back, I would just say, don't put yourself under that pressure. Get to know who you are, enjoy being you, enjoy life, enjoy travel, and enjoy all of those things without thinking that that's the goal, that's the life goal. I think that would probably be the main advice that I would give myself. Easy to say with hindsight when you've got your family and your children, isn't it? It can feel really tough when that's something that you really want. But I would say just enjoy being you, enjoy having time to yourself, discovering yourself and knowing who you are.
I love that, because that plays so much into the work that you do now, Lauren, in terms of supporting others to actually really see who they are and what their needs are and their emotional needs. So I think that's beautiful. And thank you so much. We will post all the links to everything that you've talked about today. And just, I think it's going back to if you could give one piece of advice for somebody who doesn't feel safe at the moment, what would it be?
It would be, it can get better. It can get better. Just take that first step. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you.
Before we finish, I just wanted to say this. If today stirred anything up for you, you don't need to make sense of it all right now. You can just let it land slowly. Parenting asks so much of us, especially when you're already feeling stretched. And sometimes just having the words for what we're feeling is enough for today. But if you do need more support, make sure you reach out to a trusted friend or professional. If this episode supported you in any way, you can follow by your side so that these conversations are there for you when you need them. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm really glad you're here. Just a quick note before we finish. What you hear on this podcast is here to support you, not to replace professional advice. Everyone's situation is different, so if you're worried about your own well-being or your baby's, please speak to a qualified healthcare provider. You deserve support that's tailored to you.